I just want to tell you what happened back in 1999 during the 6 months that I spent at university. I was asked to complete an assignment for applied economics that at the time was being taught by some of the most intolerable herd of steaming socialist idiots I've ever had the displeasure of turning my nose up to. The assignment, which actually I intended to be my last, asked us to discuss monetary policy and fiscal policy and their mutually exclusive relationship as they coexist in a common market, citing the European Union as an example. And having become increasingly frustrated with the hypocrisy of modern education, and that was 20 years ago, by the way, their relentless attempts at sort of pushing this regurgitative agenda where, students need not argue the point but just submit an agreeable paper, I decided, in my own style, to go out with a bang. So I began by explaining to my lecturer that the European Union was not only a flawed model, but an accident waiting to happen. I argued that monetary policy and fiscal policy were not mutually exclusive, and that you can't set the value of a currency across 30 independent member states, all with their own individual economies, their own individual taxation rates, and their own individual methods of tax collection. We're a federation of 7 states, and it's hard enough to do it here. I use the example actually of a coach and 4, but rather than 4 draft horses, you've got yourself a Clydesdale, a Shetland pony, a donkey and a mule, and you're asking them to all walk in the same direction at the same time, at the same pace and carry the same load. Well, it's not going to happen. So I further suggested that the entire project would end in tears, and that the person responsible for its conception should be brought to justice and punished in a manner consistent with the severity of his transgressions. And being my last assignment, I thought I'd proffer some suggestions for the form that particular punishment might take. Naturally, a creative corporal punishment that would be administered on a daily basis, and preferably by a 300-pound German dominatrix whose arsenal may or may not include a midget dressed in latex and a small Macedonian goat. Anyway, he failed me for some reason, I'm not entirely sure why. He told me I was a sick, twisted individual and I'd never amount to anything, and he was half right. So you can only imagine the bittersweet vindication I felt when the Greek economy collapsed a decade later for the very reason I said it would, and it almost made up for the 6 months my parents didn't talk to me for leaving uni. But, thank you, whoever said that. Education sucks, doesn't it? But something else happened in 1999, and this is what changed for me, and I saw him on SBS. A man named Nigel Farage was elected to the European Parliament. And this is before YouTube and Google and all those sorts of things, and I was up one night and, probably drunk, and I saw him. And he had one objective, to lead a campaign to get Britain out of the European Union. And little did he know at the time that this would be the shot heard around the world and that it would start a global revolution against the political and media establishment. And after 17 long years, in 2016, he succeeded. And he succeeded because, like all statesmen, he understands that politics is a contest of ideas and values and not an exercise in public relations. Something that, our current mob here over the last 11 years would probably do very well to learn, actually. So I became a fanboy, and you have absolutely no idea how much pleasure I take in standing on this stage tonight and being the man who brought Nigel Farage to Australia. And in a girly-like fashion, I was so excited, I actually made a little video of Nigel's best moments over the last sort of 10 years, and I'd like to show it to you now.
You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. Virtually none of you have ever done a proper job in your lives. Just who the hell do you think you people are? Who are you? Who voted for you?
Big government. I can't stand it.
Watching Nigel, we know you! You're a stinking racist too!
They came to bar me from actually physically entering this hotel. That's not very nice, but it's not going to stop me.
We don't know you. We don't want you. You have no legitimacy in this job at all.
This is the world's greatest leader!
All I need's the right beer named after me. That's all we need.
You know, when I came here 17 years ago, and I said that I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. You're not laughing now, are you?
one of Britain's most prominent right-wing leaders, a man named Nigel Farage, who stoked anti-immigrant sentiment, campaigned with Donald Trump.
You, as a political project, are in denial.
What part of the word leave don't you understand?
You are as stale and musty as a corked bottle of wine. Why don't you shut up and listen for a change?
Have you ever punched someone?
Oh, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nigel Farage.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Brisbane. What a fantastic hall this is, isn't it? I've spoken at venues all over the world. I don't think I've ever spoken in a more impressive auditorium. And what a fantastic city. This is, in fact, my first visit this week to Australia. I've never been here before. I wanted to come on the last two Ashes tours, but I thought, what's the point? The Aussies are going to beat us 5-0. We're going to get absolutely stuffed and humiliated. The Australian fans are going to know who I am, going to give me a hard time. So I didn't come because I thought you were a really, really great cricket team. Now we know why, don't we? Anyway, having risked that one early on, let me just say this to you. I am a completely accidental politician. I never intended to be involved in politics. I was in business. I left school at 18. I worked in the commodities business. I worked in the metals business, buying and selling copper, aluminium, or aluminum, as Donald Trump might say. A bit more of Donald later, perhaps. You never know. And I'd never intended to be involved in politics at all. But what I saw happening in my country were a group of people who had gone all to the same handful of schools, who had gone all to the same couple of universities, who'd taken the same degrees, who'd left university and become researchers in political offices, MPs in their late 20s, ministers in their middle, late 30s, and all that really motivated them was getting re-elected next time round. Career politicians. They spent their weeks together working in Westminster, their weekends socializing together. They married each other's sisters, and they couldn't really care less about the country, about their principles. They were about a career in politics. And I thought, the hell with that, because what they were doing is piece by piece, they were giving away our ability as the United Kingdom to make our own laws, control our own borders, run our own country, be a proper nation. And I thought, I'm going to fight back against these people. I'm going to fight back hard against these people. And unlike them, of course, I'd actually was able to say to the TV cameras that I'd worked for 20 years in the private sector, for 9 years running my own company. Unlike them, I could say hand on heart, I'd worked damned hard in the private sector up until lunchtime, every single day. You may have seen the cartoons of me with a pint. Well, you know, we've all got our flaws, we've all got our faults. But something really fun is happening, and I'm pleased to say we're not suffering it here tonight in Brisbane, as Damien mentioned. But everywhere I go, everywhere Donald Trump goes, for anybody who believes in the nation state, who's not ashamed to be patriotic about their country, who believes that immigration control matters, who believes that Judeo-Christian principles underpin everything in our society. Everywhere speakers like that go, they are met and confronted by protesters. Now, we've had them in Perth, we had them in New Zealand last night, we're going to get them in Sydney tomorrow night, and God knows what they're preparing in Melbourne for us. I just don't know. But let's just examine for a minute what is going on. Why are people out there shouting on the streets, holding up slogans and banners? You know, I've been called an eccentric, a raving lunatic, a racist. Oh, I'm a homophobe as well. That's important. I nearly forgot that one. I'm transphobic. I mean, there's almost no form of abuse that has not been thrown at me for just wanting to believe that we should all have our own nation states, trade together, and be friends with each other. Well, it may well be that some of these people out there are modern-day Trotskyites, that what they really want is for us to have one world government, one world currency, and I guess for them, the European Union is the prototype. It's perfect, isn't it? Think about how it makes its laws. The unelected European Commission have the sole right to make legislation. We can't vote for them. We can't remove them. And that, I think, for some of these protesters, is the way they want us to live. But for more of them, I'm afraid there's something going very badly wrong. And it's happening in Britain, it's happening in Australia, it's happening in America, it's happening right across the Western world. Through our university system, we have a group of lecturers and professors that are poisoning the minds of our youth. They really, really are. You know, we used to be taught critical thinking, to be taught, here's a problem, here are two solutions. They're both valid, and you as a grown-up make your mind up which one you subscribe to. Now we're teaching kids, here's a problem, let's say global warming, let's say mass migration, let's say the sovereignty of our nation. And we're teaching our youngsters there's one approach to this, which of course is to say that all immigration is good, that handing our powers to a higher global level is a noble thing, and that global warming is such a serious problem that we must build ugly, bird-chomping, subsidy-sucking wind turbines all over our beautiful countries. I say no! But they're taught these things, they're taught these views as if they're absolute fact. And they're told that anybody else that takes a different view is evil or almost akin to being a modern-day Nazi. That is what we're doing to our youth. And you know something? We need across the Western world some more robust politicians with the guts to stand up and say they are going to reform the university system. They're going to stop public money going into the universities until we once again start to teach our young people with some degree of objectivity. That's really, really important. Really important. But actually, their protest is really part of a wider phenomenon. It's not just students on the streets carrying their banners, getting their $20 for turning up from whoever's, maybe even a packed lunch on a good day, I don't know. No, the level of protest against what's happened since 2016 isn't confined to students, because actually we're seeing it right across the mainstream media. Anybody who's ever watched CNN? No, I can't bear it either, although there was one night I loved watching CNN. It was the 8th of November, 2016. I'll never forget it. And when the state of Pennsylvania went for Trump, just look at the faces of those presenters. It was worth every penny. Worth every penny. But you know, 24/7 we get a negative diatribe put out by CNN. We see it through much of our broadcast media. We see it through many of our newspapers. They find Brexit, Trump, what's happening in the Italian elections. They're in denial. But folks, take it from me. We are not even halfway through a great global revolution. We, the people, are standing up and we will be counted. So ludicrous have our opponents in the mainstream media become that we're now completely bound into conspiracy theory. It's the Russians what done it, isn't it? It's the Russians that caused it. The number of articles I've read suggesting that I am a Russian agent. In fact, a series of articles suggested that I was running memory sticks directly from President Trump and giving them to Julian Assange of WikiLeaks. I rang up my friend Steve Bannon. You may have heard of him, I don't know. I rang up Steve Bannon. I said, Steve, they're accusing me of running these memory sticks from the White House. I said, what do I do? He said, say nothing. They think you're even more important than you are. But we've reached hysterical rubbish being spouted, and yet, if we think about it, we could not have achieved what we have without the internet. It was Facebook, it was YouTube, it was Twitter, it was these things that allowed us to go round the back of mainstream media to get our message out onto Main Street. Well, for me, I couldn't bear what was going on. 25 years ago, I decided I've got to get involved and help form a new political party. Now, probably it was an irrational, illogical, and pretty crazy thing to do. Most of my friends and family thought perhaps I'd been smoking something rather funny. But it seemed to me there was a disconnect between what those career politicians wanted, a disconnect between what they talked about, a disconnect between how ordinary folks thought and felt, and the problem was that the main political parties were not giving them a choice. So I started standing in elections in the United Kingdom. In fact, I stood at election after election after election. And very often, I didn't get many votes, but I didn't care. I decided the principle that we should be a free, sovereign, democratic nation mattered more than anything else. And then my big chance came. Then my big chance came in 1999 when we had the European elections contested on the basis of proportional representation. It meant that smaller parties could win seats in the European Parliament. Now, the way I was treated during that campaign by the BBC, well, hang on, you boo CNN. You're not going to boo the BBC? Please, the Brits among you must. So the BBC, in that campaign, there was 624 hours of coverage on television and radio of that European election campaign. UKIP and me got 4.5 minutes. They tried to completely drown us out, to stop us, to prevent the message from getting out. Anyway, election day came, and I found myself at 1:30 in the morning, blinking into the television cameras, saying how pleased I was to be elected to a parliament I despised under an electoral system I condemned. And at that point, of course, I'd had no media training or anything like that. I mean, I'd no idea what one was supposed to do in a television interview. And I stood there, you know, and the chap said to me, camera was rolling, live TV, first ever live interview, knees knocking ever so slightly. And the interviewer says, "Congratulations, Nigel." That was the clue, of course, that it wasn't the BBC, because they'd never have said that. He said, "Congratulations, Nigel, you've been elected to the European Parliament. You said you could do it. None of us believed you. But next week," he said, "next week," he said, "you'll be off on Eurostar. You'll arrive at your office in the European Parliament. You'll find a huge pile of invitations to lunches, dinners, champagne receptions. Will you," he asked me live on my first ever TV interview, "do you think you'll become corrupted by the lifestyle?" And the answer I gave, I think, is still the best answer I've ever given in any live TV interview. I said, "No, I've always lived like that." So off I went to cause chaos. And on the first day, and 3 of us got elected, myself and 2 retired businessmen. I was just 35, young, dark-haired, shy. That bit's not true. And the first day we were there, we had a phone call from the British ambassador. Could he meet with the 3 of us? And we agreed a time. And the 3 of us sat behind a desk, and the British ambassador and 2 of his supporters sat opposite. And for what seemed like an interminable, maybe 30 or 40 seconds, there was complete silence in the room. And the ambassador looked at us and said, "Gentlemen, what are your intentions?" I said, "I'm not Guy Fawkes. I'm not a terrorist. We haven't come in to blow the whole thing up." But that was the lack of incomprehension they had, because, you see, the globalists had had their way, hadn't they? For decades and decades and decades, they had had their way. They were taking away our sovereignty. They were taking away our national identity. And they were doing it by stealth. They were doing it through lies. Well, I kept on going for years in the European Parliament. I kept on making as much as I could a complete and absolute, how can I put it? What's the word? All right, my speeches were always helpful and constructive. I made a nuisance of myself. But to be honest with you, whilst my profile was growing, whilst UKIP was growing, we weren't able really to make the breakthrough. But it was the advent of social media that enabled me to kick off our national campaign. And some would argue that I was first in the queue when it came to the great populist revolt that is now sweeping across the West. And when they say that, I feel very pleased indeed. The opportunity came when in 2010, after something called the Lisbon Treaty had been pushed through and the Union had taken yet more powers from its member states, they said that the European Union was to get its first permanent president. We were told that the man that would be selected would be so powerful and of such significance that he would stop the traffic in Washington and Beijing. Wow, I thought. They must have got somebody really good lined up for this. Is it Tony Blair? Is it someone bigger? None of us knew. And I remember the day I was in my office, and young Jamie, who works for me, ran in, and he said, they've chosen the president, the first president of Europe. It's going to be Herman Van Rompuy. I said, isn't he that Belgian geezer who was prime minister a couple of years ago? But the truth of it was, even though I worked in politics, I'd barely heard of this bloke's name. But here he was. He was going to be paid more than President Obama. He hadn't been elected. He couldn't be removed. And he was going to be the most powerful man, overseeing 500 million people living in Europe. And the great day of his inauguration came, and he turned up at the European Parliament. I didn't quite know what to expect. And then I saw this figure shuffle into the room. Straggly hair, bad suit, plastic injection molded shoes. I thought the bloke looks a shambles. He got up to speak. It was a 17-minute dirge. I thought, this is absolutely, this is the pits. This bloke, he couldn't run a bath, let alone run Europe, you know. Anyway, the leader of the Christian Democrats got up to speak and said, he's a jolly good fellow. And then the leader of the socialist group got up to speak and said, he's a jolly good fellow. And the Liberals said the same. And it was all going swimmingly as far as they were concerned. And then it was my turn to get up and speak. And I was there representing what they saw as the ragtag bunch of Eurosceptics, many of whom now, of course, are winning national elections all over Europe. Now, I got up to speak not being entirely sure what I was about to say. And there's a reason for this. I don't think scripted speeches work. I don't think people who stand up and read speeches, whether off a piece of paper or an autocue, I don't think it works. It's got no passion. It's got no spontaneity. And I know that people generally are scared of speaking in public. I bet every one of you in this room at some point has been asked to speak at a wedding. You know, you might be the best man. You might be giving away your daughter. You might be a woman who's taken over your local club. And, you know, you have to get up and speak. And people are really scared of speaking, aren't they? Really, really scared of public speaking. And I give people advice on this. I try and help them. Never, when you get to do this, folks, never begin with an apology. Never get up and say, I'm not used to doing this, or I'm no good at this. If you do that, you've lost them. And please, when you do a speech, and more often than not, it'll be in front of friends or family or whatever it may be, when you give a speech, for goodness sake, don't read it out. Stand up, look at people, keep a couple of simple points in your mind, and engage with those that you were talking to. And remember, when you're talking to them, that everybody in the room is on your side. Now, when I got up to speak on this day in the European Parliament, not only did I not quite know what I was going to say, but of course, nobody in that room was on my side at all. I had a vague idea that I would ask him who the hell he is, what authority he had, and why we should listen to a single word that he said. That was the general train of thought. You saw a little bit of a clip of it earlier, I think. So I got up and I said, well, we were told that this impressive president of Europe would stop the traffic in Brussels, Washington, Beijing, and that the European Union would now become a global superpower because of this appointment. And what we got, I said, was you. Now, I don't quite know where the next bit came from. The next bit just appeared. I'd never heard the phrase before. I've no idea where from the back of my head I dragged it. I said, and frankly, I said, you've got the charisma of a damp rag, the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. I said, the question I want to ask, the question we all want to ask is, who are you? I said, I've never heard of you. No one in Europe's ever heard of you. Well, of course, with this, my audience, the other MEPs, were going ballistic. They were standing up and shouting and chanting, and the President of the Parliament was trying to intervene and cut off my microphone. It was mayhem in there. Well, I didn't know what to do, so I just got louder and continued. And I went on to say that, of course, maybe the reason that he didn't respect nation states and wanted them to be abolished was because he came himself from a country called Belgium. Now, it doesn't necessarily cross over to Australia, this use of Belgium very easily. But let me explain that virtually nobody's got any respect for Belgium whatsoever. It is a completely artificial construct, one of Britain's greatest mistakes. But hey, maybe Australia is one of Britain's greatest successes. So we do get some things right. And certainly what I've seen of it this week and the people I've met, you've got a fantastic country here. And one of the things you've got to do is not make the same mistakes that we've made in our country. So now Belgium is much derided, and of course the great question is, all right then, name me a famous Belgium. And they say Tintin, fictional character. They say Hercule Poirot, fictional character. And it's not Herman Van Rompuy either. Although that speech I gave, it's very interesting. It wasn't just me that didn't know who he was. Nobody in Germany had heard of him. Nobody in France had heard of him. That speech I gave made such big headlines that his recognition rate doubled as a result of me. He should have been paying me, really, shouldn't he? Anyway, I knew I'd caused a bit of a stir, and when I sat down, speaker after speaker got up to condemn me. You know, I'd behaved like a football hooligan and many other things that were said. And unsurprisingly, later on that afternoon, the telephone call came through from the President's office of the European Parliament. Would I appear to meet the President at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning? Now, after a very checkered career at school, I was quite used to being summoned at 9 o'clock in the morning to the headmaster's office. It had happened many times before. So there I was, outside the office, you know the drill, exercise book down the back of the trousers. I was going in for 6 of the best. Millennials here, don't get too upset. We used to cane children, all right, in the old days. It was all a bit tougher in the old days. Poor darlings, it would never happen to you now, I promise you. So in I went, and I was summoned to a chair by the President of the Parliament, a man called Jerzy Buzek, a former Polish Prime Minister, distinguished, apparently, European politician. And my second big piece of advice, folks, to all of you, is if you're called in for a meeting at work or wherever it may be, if you're called into a meeting and coffee is not offered, you're in for a bollocking, all right? So I sat down, coffee wasn't offered, and the President started. He said, Mr. Farage, I'm going to ask you to apologize. I wanted you to apologize to the European Parliament for bringing the institution into disrepute. Now, of course, I should have just bit my lip, really, shouldn't I? But I said, well, actually, I think you've been having a fairly good go at that yourselves over the last couple of years. That wasn't really helping. He then said, I want you to apologize to Mr. Van Rompuy and his extended family for the hurt and the harm that you've caused them. I said, hang on a second. Hang on a second. In parliaments all over the world, in democracies every single week, opposition leaders tear chunks out of prime ministers. Backbenchers have a go at each other. It's called the open debate and democratic process. I said in the Australian Parliament, they even call each other wanker when they get upset. None of this was helping, of course. And he then said, and this is the bit that cracked me up, he said, I want you to apologize to the people of Belgium for what you've said about their country. Well, it's a bit tough to keep a straight face in circumstances like that. I said, look, I'm not apologizing for anything. I've said what I've said, and I believe myself to be absolutely right. And then he thought he'd play his final card with me. He said, but Mr. Farage, you don't seem to understand. You can't criticize Herman Van Rompuy. He's not been elected. I said, I know. That was the whole point of the speech I was trying to make in the first place. So they decided they would levy upon me the maximum fine the Parliament could impose. I was fined the same amount of money as if I'd committed a huge fraud. I mean, ludicrous, isn't it? just shows you free speech these days comes at a bit of a cost. And I walked out of the room, and there they were, the assembled media, cameras flashing away. They'd obviously all been tipped off, and they knew they'd threatened me with a financial penalty. And of course, they thought I'd do what all career politicians do in a crisis, which is to collapse in a heap and apologize and atone for what they've done. God, they're pathetic, these people, aren't they? So they're all shouting at me, have you apologized? Have you apologized? And I said, ladies and gentlemen of the press, please, I think there was a time in life when a man needs to hold up his hands. A time in life when a man needs to admit he's gone too far. He's got it wrong. He's been over the top. He's caused offense. And yes, I apologize here and now to bank clerks all over the world for any offense I might have caused. So what I'd done is I'd exposed the fact that increasingly bureaucracy was taking over from democracy. I'd exposed the fact that our country increasingly was being run by a bunch of foreign bureaucrats whose names we didn't even know. And it went sensational on social media. And I went from being somebody that was known by those that follow politics to becoming a household name. And there's a moral in this, I think, for all of us that want to fight for the values that I believe many in this room share. We've got one powerful weapon that the other side does not possess. Just look at them. Angela Merkel, Hillary Clinton. They're all dull. They're all technocratic. They're all lifeless. None of them have got any energy, any passion, or, crucially, none of them have got any humor, have they? And what I'd managed to do was to use humor to make a very, very serious message, and social media gave that massive play, and suddenly my career was off to the races. Suddenly, UKIP was posing a mortal threat to David Cameron. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And in the end, as I led this movement to getting bigger and stronger, in the end, the Prime Minister gave in. He said, okay, we will have a referendum on Britain's membership of the European Union. Of course, not believing for a moment he'd ever lose it, but believing that by offering this referendum, he would do away with me. It was called shooting the UKIP fox. Offer a referendum, and that bloody nightmare Farage will disappear from our lives. Because what he didn't realize was, I'd been saying for years, we should have a referendum on being a member of the European Union. They'd all called me a nutcase for even suggesting it, and now the British government was saying that it was a good idea. All they'd done was to legitimize, frankly, everything I'd been campaigning for. So I went on being a thorn in their side, and the referendum came, and we saw all the things you would expect to see. We saw the big banks, the Goldman Sachses of this world. Where did Malcolm Turnbull work before? Goldman Sachs. Oh, yeah. We saw the... I'd have thought Malcolm Turnbull deserved a bigger boo than that personally, although I'm a foreigner. If I was an Australian, I'd be joining you. Good riddance to bad rubbish, I'd say. But we saw this... We saw this unholy alliance of big businesses, big banks, and big politics. Every global leader telling us we must vote to remain inside the European Union. Even President Obama coming to our country and saying, if we vote to leave, we'll be at the back of the queue. Oh, and all of them, by the way, funded by George Soros. Thank you. We were told hundreds of thousands of jobs would disappear overnight. We were told our manufacturing industry would leave our shores. The City of London would close down. We would head into a downward economic spiral. George Osborne, the Chancellor, told us there'd be an emergency budget. Taxes would be raised. I'm surprised we weren't told that a plague of black locusts would descend on our land. And despite all of this, despite all of the threats, despite all of the cheating with public money, despite it all, the British people stood up and said, we want our country back. It was a very, very great day. It was a very great day. And 2 days later, the European Parliament said, we must have an emergency debate. So off I went to Brussels. By now, dark glasses, baseball cap and 2 security guards. And the emergency debate was due to start at 3 o'clock. And I thought, well, I'll get into the chamber at about 3-4 minutes to 3. That's about the right choreography. I knew the press would all be there in the well of the Parliament. That struck me as being the right time to do it. And as I walked in, I noticed that Mr. Juncker, who's now the Commission President, but isn't it interesting, you see? It's very, very important, this. I talked earlier about critical thinking, yeah? The fact that we should appreciate the fact that people can have different opinions. And actually, if you think about it, what those that went before us and sacrificed so much for in 2 world wars was for us to have free, open political debate conducted on a fair basis. I hate the people on the other side who are dishonest. I hate the people on the other side who are outright liars and manipulators. But I respect people on the other side who've got a different opinion, because in a free society they're allowed to do it. Now, Mr. Juncker and I are diametrically opposed politically, but at least he holds his view sincerely. At least he's honest about it, and on a personal level, we actually get on quite well. So old Juncker was down there with the press all around him, and I walked down towards my seat, and of course, through serendipity, I've got seat number 20 on the front row of the European Parliament, and Juncker's got seat number 21. I mean, they couldn't have scripted it better for me, really, could they? And so I arrived down there, and of course the photograph that they all want is they want Juncker and I. And Juncker comes up with the cameras all around us, he puts his arm around me, and he whispers into my ear, "You bastard." I, of course, burst out laughing, and the photograph on the front page is the next day is Juncker and I laughing. No one could work out the reason why. I haven't yet told them. Anyway, they all gave their speeches about what a dark day it was for the European project. Brexit was the most awful, terrible thing. No doubt, the British voters were thick, stupid, had been misled and lied to, and maybe this could all be reversed at some point in the future. And then it came to my turn to speak. Now, again, I genuinely did not know how they'd respond. A little bit of me thought, maybe, just maybe, they might today respect me. They might today sit in silence and listen to what I have to say. A little bit of me thought that, not a lot, sir. Don't shake your head too hard. And of course, my name's announced. I get up, and about 400 of them start booing. I thought, right, that's it. No more Mr. Nice Guy from me. And that's why I said, when I came here 17 years ago, I said I would lead a movement that would take Britain out of the European Union. And you all laughed at me. Well, I said, you're not laughing now, are you? And I went on. I went on to tell them that they'd never had a proper job in their lives, and I generally had a bit of a ball. Brexit was, I think, the most significant political event in the Western world in modern times. It was my honor to be part of it all the way through. And a funny thing happened on Brexit Day. A plane came in from the east coast of America to a golf course on the west coast of Scotland. And in it was one Donald J. Trump. And Trump had been watching me and my speeches and what I've been doing for a couple of years. He'd been watching Brexit. Trump believed in Brexit because Trump believes in the nation state. Trump believes in patriotism. Trump believes in, Western values that many of us hold dear. And it wasn't long before a phone call came through from the governor of Mississippi. Would I go down to Jackson, their state capital, attend a dinner with Donald Trump and give a speech to the activists, the Republican activists in Jackson, Mississippi, explaining why Brexit meant that the establishment could be beaten, why Brexit meant that a global political revolution was possible. And I was only too happy to accept the invitation. So I turn up, and Trump gets up, and he says, I've been going around America calling myself Mr. Brexit. He said, but with Nigel here, I feel a bit of a fraud. Up I went, I spoke, I did my bit. It was great fun. He was on good form, although politically he was in a bad place. August 14, he was 12 to 14 points behind in the opinion polls. But a few days before I arrived in Mississippi, he sacked his campaign managers and he replaced them with Kellyanne Conway and with Steve Bannon. Good thinking, good thinking. Anyway, we did the dinner. And then the fun bit was to happen. The fun bit, we were off to the basketball stadium where 18,000 Mississippians had been waiting for hours to hear Trump speak. And I was really excited. I had a backstage pass. There was Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York. Remember him, the guy that cut crime in New York massively? Amazing guy. Just wishing Sadiq Khan might learn a tour thing in London, but hey. Jeff Sessions was there, the Alabama senator who I'd known for 5 or 6 years, who, of course, went on to become the Attorney General. The governor of Mississippi was there. I was there, a couple of friends. And Trump was there, going through a few notes, working out what he was going to do. And I was really excited. Here I was going to be in the audience of an American campaign rally. It's fantastic. And it got to about 20 past 7, and Stephen Miller, who's now Trump's main speechwriter, comes over to me and says, Nigel, we've decided we'd like you to speak. I said, I'm sorry? No, that Donald would like you to speak. In fact, he's going to introduce you. I said, I looked at him, what in God's name are you talking about? Then Trump comes over. Hey, Nigel, give him the Brexit message. Don't hold back. Tell him how it can be done. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and goes. So it was like 8 minutes to go. There's 18,000 Mississippians. Deep South. Goodness only knows what I was in for. And I don't think I've ever felt so nervous in all my life. I was standing below the podium. Donald was on the top. And he says, ladies and gentlemen, he says, I want to introduce you to a man who, against all odds, and of course, being Donald, he repeated it, against all odds, overcame terrible name-calling, terrible victimization, and triumphed through it all. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Brexit, Mr. Nigel Farage. And they all go mad. And there I am. And there's Trump. And I take the podium. And I'm sort of really thinking, oh, my goodness gracious me. But I kind of got it moving. There've been a lot of stories around about Hillary Clinton and Bill, about how corrupt they'd been, particularly with the Clinton Foundation. A lot of accusations about money and the misappropriation of money. And you may remember, Donald called her Crooked Hillary, didn't he? Crooked Hillary, and the crowds chanted, lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. So I thought, well, let's have a go on Hillary. I said, I'm not as a foreigner here to tell you what to do. I said, but let me say this. If I was an American, I wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton if you paid me. And whoa, they loved it. And I then got the line they really loved. I said, I wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton if she paid me. Oh, they love that. They love that. And it was great, and it was fun, and I came off the podium, and Trump shook my hand. He looked me in the eye, and he said, Nigel, you will be my friend for life for doing that. And you know, people like that, people who are businessmen and not career politicians, they understand what trust is about. They understand that if they make a promise to someone they like, they keep it. So I was very honored for that to happen. And the next morning, the icing on the cake, I was sitting at Jackson Airport. It was midday. I was feeling terrible. I can't imagine why. May have been that party afterwards and 90 minutes in bed, I'm not sure. And I'm sitting there feeling and there's a live news conference on CNN. And it's Hillary. It's Hillary saying Donald Trump has sunk to the depths. He got the racist, homophobic, transphobic, anti-Semitic, I mean, a long list. And Nigel Farage along. This proves that Trump is desperate. And at 1 minute, Hillary Clinton had made me a figure in the US presidential election. Thank you, Hillary. Thank you. Thank you. So I kept going back. I kept going back through the campaign. I attended the debates, and I kind of became part of the spin team supporting Trump. And Trump won that amazing victory, didn't he? Amazing, amazing victory. And that was the moment I realized that Brexit was not an isolated event. Brexit was the beginning of a great global political revolution. Trump won, and look at what's happened ever since then. Just look at what's happening in Italy with Matteo Salvini standing up and saying, we will not take unlimited numbers of migrants across the Mediterranean. We will defend our way of life. We will defend our culture. And he's right, isn't he? And it's happening in Germany, where the Alternative for Deutschland is now the second-place party. There are elections taking place this coming Sunday, and they'll happen in Sweden, where again, Eurosceptic parties that believe in a nation state will make massive progress. And I want to say this to you folks. Whenever you see these protests, hear these horrible things being said, see the negativity through mainstream media, remember this. They're doing it because they're losing. We are winning. We are getting there. Now, short term, that may feel a bit awkward here in Australia, because, I mean, I left a country mired in political crisis, internecine warfare going on within our established political parties. I came to Australia to get a break from it. It hasn't really worked out very well, as you've been through 7 premiers over the course of the last 11 years. And people think, well, it's unlikely that a great political revolution will take place here in Australia. But actually, look at the arguments. Look at the dividing lines of debate. What are people talking about? They're talking about Australia's immigration policy, a policy, by the way, that many of us had admired hugely for decades, but which in the course of the last few years appears to have lost its direction, appears to have lost its understanding of what it used to be. You've got the debate going on in this country over renewable energy. The fact that your taxpayers and your manufacturers are expected to pay to make the rich even richer. You've got the argument going on here over Paris, where one government can make a decision that binds others. So actually, unless your mainstream political parties start to reflect that, then I think you may well see a political revolution and new, exciting things happening in Australia too. I really, really do. We're living through the most fascinating period of time in Western politics there possibly could be. For my part, I almost can't believe it. I almost have to pinch myself that a cricket-loving middle-class boy from Kent has kicked off this revolution that has got the socialists and that has got the globalists and has got the big businesses and the big banks in such a state of lather. They seem to absolutely hate me, but I was told years ago by my old headmaster at school, be judged in life by your enemies. And if Hillary Clinton is my mortal enemy, I must be getting something right. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay. So today, Nigel and I and Peter and a couple of others went to lunch, and I spent 2.5 hours on the phone dealing with police, and it was actually quite funny, and Nigel was in stitches most of the time, at least I thought he was, because Peter was cutting up my meat and feeding it to me so I could actually have my phone like that. But we're living in an age where my lunch is interrupted because left-wing protesters who think Nigel is responsible for the Aboriginal genocide are coming to protest tomorrow night. Does this happen in the UK?
We do get it in the UK. I have to say, it seems to me that maybe protesting has become a bit of an Australian national sport. They seem to be particularly heavily organised in Melbourne. Look, I mean, to protest, to disagree with somebody is fine. But actually what we had the other night happening both in Perth and in Auckland were protesters abusing members of the public who were coming into these meetings. And their object isn't to protest. Their object is to stop people like me coming here and spreading our message. Their object is to close down free speech. And we've got to close ranks on this, folks. We really, really have.
So we've had, for those of you that don't know, and we've done a couple of these shows, we've had to change venues. I think there's another promoter in the audience tonight, Dave Pellowe from Axiomatic, who brought out Lauren Southern recently. A big round of applause for Dave. Where are you, Dave? Doesn't matter, I can't see him. But, you know, it's a real issue. And what's happening is the left is, or the protesters, or whatever you want to call them, they're basically going to the venues, or they're calling the venues up. They're putting pressure on them. And then the police are complicit, because what's happening is the police are thinking to themselves, well, we don't want to have to deal with this. So then the police, especially in Victoria, they ring the venues and they say, oh, look, you're going to get a lot of protesters. We don't recommend this. And so the venue cancels. And so we've sold all these tickets to good people like yourselves, right? And then we have to refund or move, and it's an absolute bitch. Pardon my French.
So why is Brisbane so much more sensible than the other Australian cities? That's what I want to know.
Good question. George, I'm going to put you on the spot, mate. You want to answer that? We're different in Queensland. You are different in Queensland. So no, it is a real problem. And Nigel, and I think we spoke about this the other day. We've got every year for Australia Day, we have this change the date campaign. You know, let's make it May 8 because it's mate. Right? No significance whatsoever. I live in Sydney. They desecrate the statues. They want to rip down Captain Cook's statue because he was complicit in the genocide. I mean, it is an absolute nonsense. And we're seeing it in America, and we're seeing it here. And frankly, and this, not you, George, but there is very little leadership from our political leaders. And we just keep going through them in terms of prime ministers because no one actually wants to deal with this.
Yeah. I must say, this whole trend to attempt to rewrite history, you might have seen in America, they tore a statue down of General Lee, and it's happening elsewhere. We've had campaigns in Oxford University to get rid of statues of Cecil Rhodes, and we all want to apologise for everything that went before us. We want to judge how our forebears lived through the prism of what's considered acceptable today. And you know, you can't rewrite history. Maybe what you can do is learn from history.
Correct.
You know? And I don't go along at all with all these apologies, although I will say this. What we, the United Kingdom, did to you in Australia back in 1973, when we turned our backs on our best friends in the world. We joined the common market. We made it tough for you guys to sell us your produce. That is an historical wrong that I'm not going to apologize for, but with Brexit, we're going to be free and able to get our relationship back with Australia to where it ought to be.
Okay, I can see a lineup of questions here. One at a time. If you could, you may approach the bench. You can address him as Your Honour.
Good evening. All right, so it's just short and simple. First of all, I've been following you for ages. I love your work. But this is actually a question for CANZUC, about CANZUC. I'm not sure if you've heard of the CANZUC International Campaign.
Yep, go on.
Yes, it's before the UK joined the European Union, there used to be free movement of people between the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, so visa-free travel. Now that the UK has left the European Union, I'm just wondering, can we get that back? Can we get visa-free travel between Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, as well as free trade agreements? Is that?
Do you know, when I first went to work in London, everybody that served me a drink, there were lots of them, you know, everyone that cut my hair, they were all from New Zealand, Australia. They were all young people. They'd come to London, they'd come to the UK, they'd come for a year, 2 years, go back again. And now I hardly ever see anybody from Australia or New Zealand because we unconditionally opened our doors to countless numbers of people coming in from Southern and Eastern Europe. And look, I'm all for those of us with this common bond that we've got to be able to travel to each other's countries, to have as little bureaucracy as possible, provided that it's not a soft way for mass migration, provided it's used by people to go for a year or whatever it is. Yes, and look, you know, the truth of it is, our relationship with you guys, your neighbors, India, many parts of the Caribbean, Canada, our relationship with them, I mean, look, we're family, for goodness sake.
Exactly.
We're family, that's the point. And yet our politicians turned their back on the Commonwealth and decided to link us to a group of countries, most of whom don't actually like us very much. I mean, the whole thing is mad. I want us to be good neighbours with Europe, not to be controlled with Europe, but to retake our place in the world. And I think the Commonwealth and the English-speaking world, where we have a shared language, a shared history, we've between us, you know, spent much treasure and shed much blood to make sure that we and the rest of the world could live in free democracies. And one of my major aims of Brexit is to correct all of that. Let's get back the English speakers to where we need to be.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Nigel, first of all, thanks for coming out. Nigel, my family arrived in Australia as refugees at the end of the Second World War. They fled the communists, came out here. Part of the resettlement agreement, my grandfather had to go and work for the government for 2 years on basic wages wherever they sent him, so not to be a burden there. The main reason they came to us, he worked on the railways, building the railways there as well. The main reason they came here was it was the furthest place from communism that they could find. Now, what do you suggest that we can do? Because we've got a massive, they call them refugees, okay? My mother was a true refugee, right? What do you suggest that we can do to stop these people moving us into communism, which we fled?
Nigel, sorry, if I may, have a look at his T-shirt. It says Rocket Man.
Oh, I like that. Oh, I like that. I like that.
I thought you would.
And isn't it funny? Isn't it funny? What part of Trump's genius is that he attacks people, and he attacks them so much they think, crikey, he may be serious. You know, Rocket Man, you know, when he said, do you remember that speech that he gave?
Little Rocket Man.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. And Rocket Man thought, crikey, we better have a meeting and start talking about this. So it just shows, actually, strong national leaders who've got a strategy can achieve a lot. You know, this whole issue of refugees, two things to say. Firstly, the way that the Tony Abbotts and others dealt with the boats coming to Australia, going back a few years, was an object lesson that I wish Europe had listened to. And indeed, I stood up in the European Parliament and I told Juncker and all of them back in 2015, when the boats started coming across the Mediterranean, I said, do not do this, otherwise there will be a massive flow of people. They ignored me. I said publicly in that Parliament, look at the Australians, they got this right. I was ignored completely, of course. And then, of course, Mrs. Merkel, great crowd, this. Mrs. Merkel then compounded it by saying, as many of you as want to come, come. It led to a huge flow of people coming into Europe, none of whom we know who they really are, none of them we can security check. And when ISIS said they would use this flow of people to get their bad guys into Europe, we should have taken them seriously. And here's a sobering thought for all of you on refugee policy. Of the 8 people that committed those barbarities in Paris a couple of years ago, 5 of them got back into Europe saying they were refugees. If that is not warning enough, I don't know what is. The United Nations definition of a refugee, is an individual in fear of their life because of their religion, their race, or their political beliefs. That is what a refugee is. And when I put that poster up a week before the referendum, breaking point, the EU has failed us all, for which I took probably more abuse than anything I've ever done before. But you look at that picture, there are no women, no old people, no children, no disabled people. It's all young males, aged 18 to 30, frankly, taking the mickey. And look at what it's done. Look at what it's done. Look at Malmo. Look at cities in Sweden where the murder rates exploded, where sexual violence has exploded. We need to be, if we're going to be civilized countries, let's work out what a refugee actually is, and let's make sure that the word refugee is not a way for people to get into our countries who wish to destroy our civilization. We must not let our compassion destroy our culture.
Hear, hear. Your shirt's not anywhere near as good as his. It's all right. Off you go.
Nigel, you are the greatest hero of our time politically. You and Donald Trump together, the greatest heroes of our time.
Yep.
I've been a huge fan of you ever since I saw that "Who are you" speech. I've played it to all my friends and they're sick of me. Question is, Brexit was just over 2 years ago. Since then, nothing's happened. There has not been a Brexit. The establishment are delaying, obfuscating, nothing's happened. If Britain is a democracy and there's been a democratic vote and nothing happens, what do you think needs to happen next for Brexit to actually happen and be Brexit? Does UKIP need to get into the House of Commons?
They believe, the globalists believe, if they can stop Brexit, they'll stop the whole global revolution. That is how significant Brexit is as a political landmark. We finished up after Brexit with a Prime Minister who'd voted Remain, who still to this day cannot say she believes in Brexit, just that she's carrying out the will of the people, who clearly, from the Africa trip, needs some dancing lessons very, very quickly. She stands up and says, we'll take back control of our laws, our borders, our money, and it sounds great. And then she does the opposite. I think she's the most duplicitous, dishonest, worst Prime Minister I have seen in my lifetime. But it's not just her. Pretty much the whole of Parliament, with some exceptions, wants to dilute, delay, or even stop Brexit. We've got Mr. Blair launching a campaign for a second referendum. We've got Mr. Soros funding the whole thing. Let me tell you this. I've stepped back a bit from the front line, but I now think we're entering into a critical period, an absolutely critical period. We're due to leave on March 29th next year. Leaving's important, but equally the terms upon which we leave are important as well. I don't want Brino. I don't want Brexit in name only. I want us to be an independent, self-governing nation. I want my country back. That's what I fought for. So I have now been reactivated, and I'm going out on the road. I'm doing a big series of public rallies up and down the country. The open-top double-decker bus is back. I start on September the 22nd. I'm going to be out campaigning, giving it all I've got, and I'm going to put the fear of God into them.
Happy with that?
Good evening.
Hello.
You hear me?
Yep.
Do you like me, Nigel? To your amusement, I'm Eastern European. My name is Mariana Menzies, and I like you.
Thank you.
So, my question, let's get practical. I want to know, because I'm with you, and there is a serious problem with migration in Europe. And I want to know how we can open a procedure of referendum on that with the people, and they have their say in each country of the European Union. And I posted this question to the Commissioner of Migration, your Greek peer, and he called me nationalist and chauvinist and didn't give me an answer. So I'm asking you how we can open a procedure of referendums in each country.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question.
Can we?
It's a very interesting question. So the parliamentary systems that we've had, and kind of Westminster was seen to be the mother of parliaments. What an irony that the mother of parliaments gave away control to the European Commission. We've had a form of representative democracy, okay, where we entrust our politicians for a period of time to act on our behalf, and then that authority comes back to us. The problem has become the emergence of the global elites, the fact that in many countries on big issues, the differences between the parties have become so small that representative democracy has started to fail. Switzerland has a referendum procedure that it can trigger at national level, at canton level, and at state level. It's called direct democracy. I don't think we should have referendums on flippant issues. I don't believe we should have referendums too often. But I do think that in the 21st century, the 18th century principle of representative democracy, frankly, is failing us. The British referendum proves that when the people are asked what they think, they will very often give a different answer to what the career politicians think. And I lead a group in the European Parliament that is called the Europe of Freedom and Direct Democracy Group. And I believe direct democracy is what we need in all of our countries. The ability to trigger a referendum on key issues if our politicians are letting us down. That, in the 21st century, is true democracy.
Thank you.
But of course, the discussion that we had the other day, the politicians in the European Union, in the European Parliament rather, don't have any power at all, do you?
No, the European Parliament really is there to say, look, it's democratic, isn't it? But actually the sole right of initiating European legislation rests with the European Commission. The unelected bureaucrats have the sole right to make law. It is the ultimate victory of bureaucracy over democracy. But it happens at a lower level too. And anybody working in business anywhere in the Western world, you've got local authorities, you've got teams of inspectors, bureaucracy is actually crushing free market capitalism, and the big companies love that. The big companies love regulation, the big companies love lots of law. It lets them carve up the marketplace between themselves, and keep the small individual man and woman running their own business from competing. And I'm on the side of free market capitalism. I'm on the side of men and women, entrepreneurs, going out there, taking a chance, doing their best.
Go ahead, Led.
Hi, huge fan. I've been following your work for a few years now. I'm 17. I'm probably one of the youngest people here, and
well, we're very pleased you're here. We're very
well done,
pleased
man.
You're here.
Well done.
Thank you.
I wasn't talking politics at 17.
A lot of people, like most people my age, they're not interested in politics, or if they do get into anything political, it's automatically, I feel like the left is automatically just the default that people go to, millennials or Gen Z, and most people think like the situation in North Carolina where the baker, or they're trying to shut down his bakery for practicing religious rights, or a world where in Canada and I think New York and California, you can be fined $200,000 for misgendering someone, even if they just make up a complete gender, completely made up gender. And I'm very proud of. I support free speech, very proud of my political views, and I know conservatism is right. Like, that's why, I wear my Make America Great Again hat to school.
I've noticed, yeah, I like it.
And I wear like a Trump sticker on my bag, and I always get it.
That's very good.
I tell you what, I admire your courage, and I'm enjoying what you're saying, but with respect to those behind you, you've got to ask a question.
I was about to do that.
Yeah, I always get it stolen and stuff, and people think this is just acceptable because you're spreading hate or bigotry. How do I? What advice would you have for someone like me trying to, be proud of my political views, spread them, and getting attacked all the time?
Well, it's a very, very good question. I'm very pleased that you've come and said what you've just said. I do a phone-in program on a commercial radio station, LBC, in the United Kingdom, and I very often debate the university theme. You heard me speak earlier about how passionately I feel about what's going wrong in our colleges and universities, and I get a lot of callers like you, a lot of young people your age, up to 21, 22, saying that in lectures, if they say something, the lecturer will try and turn the class onto them to get them all sort of pointing and shouting and screaming. It's sort of George Orwell, scary stuff. It is very difficult to stand up for what you believe in if doing that comes at a price. It is one of the most difficult things for human beings to do, and it takes people of great strength of character and great resolution to do so. I think you are, from what I can see of you, the kind of lad, if he's got the balls to come up the front age 17 and speak in a hall like this, I reckon you'll stick to your principles, and I don't think it'll be long before a lot more young people join you. Why do I say that? In America, there's a new student group called Turning Point. They've got 1,200 branches right across America. They've got very sharp guys set it up. Their spokeswoman, Candace Owens, black girl in her mid-20s, absolute star. I'm going to speak at their Christmas convention in Palm Beach. I mean, some of this is tough, this gig, I'm going to Palm Beach to speak to their Christmas convention. There are 5,000 young students going to be there at that convention, and I think Turning Point is now giving young people in America a rallying point. And what young people need, actually, they need some leadership, they need some inspiration, and they also need to think, if they turn up at these rallies and conventions, they're going to have a good time and a good laugh too, because that matters, because we're all human beings. So stick with it. I think turning, as Brexit led the way for a change of political debate across the Western world, my hope, my belief is that Turning Point will now become a youth movement for those with conservative views, unashamed of standing up for their countries, their communities, and their cultures. It's coming. Hang on, you won't be on your own, I promise you.
We've got 2 more questions. Time for 2 more.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming to Brisbane. It's an honour to have you here. It's an honour to speak with you. Now, my question is, well, it was his question, so I'll ask a different one. I can tell you, young Australians are starting to, be aware of all this. Men like you are heroes we look up to and we want to emulate in our own country and our own struggles. And my question to you is a little more specific. So you mentioned Turning Point. I'm familiar with them. There's many other organisations of all kinds broadly on the right. And my question is essentially, what is your advice to young people particularly, because we're not coming from money, we're coming from university and part-time jobs is hard for us at the beginning. What is your advice for actually getting somewhere, getting into perhaps office or leading campaigns or doing what we need to do broadly? So for us who do know what we want to do, some of us many people are better speakers than me, and they have the skills, they have everything. Social media is almost lost to us now because of censorship. And my question is essentially, how would you, if you were a young person, how would you go about it? How would you go about tackling something like Brexit if it hadn't happened yet,
okay.
for a young person?
Do you know, very, very often over the years, I've been doing this 20 years nearly now. Over the years I've been doing this, and I've spoken at hundreds of schools and universities and love the challenge of doing so. One of the commonest questions I get from people like you is, how do we get into politics? How do we become politicians? Students ask me this. My answer is, don't. Wait until you're at least 30, go out, leave university, learn a trade, learn a skill, do a job, be part of the real world before you try to go for elected office. Very, very important that we do that. And I don't doubt that here in Australia some really talented young people who've got the right skill sets to be in politics. Do you know what? Once they've got some experience of the real world, they'll be doubly good. Join campaigns, get involved, help in elections, but can we please stop this idea that students within a few years become politicians? Let's get some older men and women in politics with real life experience. That's my advice.
Thank you.
Sorry, guys, last question.
Hey, Nigel. I first of all, thank you for bringing us Brexit. And also, I just want to say that I am a huge fan of your radio show on LBC. I do tune in like a couple times a week.
Very good.
Forgive me, I do have 3 questions, but they're all short answer questions, so it's not too bad. So the first one's a personal question. It's in 2 parts. As you've alluded to, you said that you've been inactive from politics for a couple of years now. So my first question is, what exactly, was there a particular event that prompted you to come back to the fold, or was it just general dissatisfaction?
Look, I've actually, in the last 2 years, still been leading a group in the European Parliament, right? I've still been commentating, writing, broadcasting, going on television. I've not been in the front line of the campaign, but I'm going back into the front line of the campaign before the end of this month. Why? Because the deadline of March 29th is approaching, and I fear what the establishment want to do is try to delay the whole thing. I'm back to make sure we meet that deadline. I want to put the fear of God into those MPs on the verge of betraying their constituents. I'm not going to let them get away with it, all right? Simple as that.
Thank you. Yeah, and second question. Quick second question. Yeah, so if you had to pick anyone, like a figure who would lead the Brexit charge, who would it be? Would it be like Lord Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson, someone else, yourself? You say it.
Well, the great thing about the great thing about national campaigns is you need a mixture of people. You need people on the right of politics, but you also need people on the left of politics. Do you know, the left have lost their soul. I grew up with a Labour Party. I didn't vote for them, but they were patriots. They believed in the country. They believed in a nation. They believed in doing what was best for Britain. The left, it seems to me, have now been hijacked all over the West by a bunch of lunatics who want to protest and get rid of all of our borders. Look, big politics, big national politics, big issues transcend the normal divisions of left and right.
Agreed.
You've got one more question, and then we're finished.
We've got to finish up.
Yeah, so of course we're all praying for 2019 to get all the Brexit that we all want, the hard Brexit. But my question is, what would be the Brexiteers faction's contingency plan? So suppose in 2019 May gives us a soft Brexit or a Brino, what would be the next move? And
look, if we don't get the Brexit we want, not only will I be out campaigning all around the country, we'll have to go back to 1381 in England when Wat Tyler pitched up a pitchfork and led the peasants' revolt. All right? If that's what we have to do, we'll do it. All right?
Thank you, sir. God save the Queen.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, please thank Nigel Farage.
Thank you very much indeed, Damien. Thank you very much.
No worries,
indeed.
Nigel. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brisbane.